Good morning, Stampers. My name is Juanette, and I'm an independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator here in the United States. All the products that I feature in my tutorial are available for purchase from my 24/7 online store. Today's inspiration came from a picture that I copied off of the internet of the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Many of you know that I was married to a Frenchman for over 20 years. My children have French names, Giselle and Jean-Pascal, so I have a very warm spot in my heart for the French people and for France. So this picture I copied as much as I could using the elements that are in our annual catalog. There's water down below there. I did the Eiffel Tower. I used the trees, some bushes behind the Eiffel Tower. And on the inside, I did a little bit of flag, the French flag, and then the sentiment from our Parisian beauty stamp set. Now the final card is quite large. It's 8 inches by 6 inches. So I made an envelope using our designer series paper for the card. Now the supplies I used were Whisper White cardstock, Crumb Cake cardstock, Night of Navy cardstock, Crushed Curry cardstock, and Old Olive. And then the inks that I use will be displayed in the description box and also on the video itself. Now I used the Parisian Beauty stamp set. I used that little embellishment down there for the bridge, and then Life is a Magnificent Adventure for my sentiment. For the Eiffel Tower, there is this beautiful die that I cut out of Crumb Cake. Then I also used the Lily Pad Lake stamp for the water. Underneath the bridge. This is available in the annual catalog. Then for the trees, I used the Silhouette Scenes die set and cut those out of crushed curry. For part of the bridge, I used Beautiful Promenade, just that small little die up there. And I will show you later on where that is. Now this is a retired set, Lift Me Up, and I used that small part of the balloon die to cut out the arches in the bridge. So for our card base, you're going to start with a piece of 12 by 8 Whisper White cardstock, and you're going to score it along the long side at 6 inches. Then you're going to fold and burnish that. Then for our inside of the card and where we're going to build our scene, you will need 2 pieces of 7 1/2 by 5 1/2. And that right there is the beginning of my scene there. Then for your mats, you will need 2 pieces of Night of Navy that are 7 3/4 by 5 3/4. Plus you will need a little bit of a scrap for the sentiment. Now I'm going to go ahead and glue the Night of Navy to the outside of my card base and the inside. I am using this 3-in-1 glue that is available both at Michael's and at Hobby Lobby, and I believe also at Walmart. I like this glue because it is a solvent glue. It is not water-based, so it will not warp your cardstock. And so that piece is just going on the inside of the card. Then I will also take the other piece of Whisper White, and again that is 7.5 by 5.5, and I will glue it to the inside of the card so that you will be able to write your message to your recipient along with having our sentiment in there. Now I'm going to start building our sky, and I am using a makeup brush there to apply some blue. I believe that was Balmy blue. And I'm laying down some color all across the top of that Whisper White piece. Starting off on the edge or the outside of the card and then bringing the color in. Then I also use some Seaside spray. Now for the cloud on the card, I use Whisper White re-inker, put some on clear block. I had tried it just using the dauber on the ink pad, and my ink pad probably needs to be refilled, so I was not able to get much color from it, so that's why I put it on the block. And then I just used a cloud die from Up and Away to apply a little bit of a white cloud there. The one on the right you don't see very much in the final card because there is a tree branch covering it. Now this stays white for a while, so you will need to let it dry. Then for the water, I used Bermuda Bay and Coastal Cabana with a little bit of crushed curry for the reflection on the water. Again, using my makeup brushes to apply that color to the bottom of that Whisper White piece. Then I took the stamp from the lily pad lake, which is the water, and applied some ink waves using Bermuda Bay. And again, you don't see very much of this in the final card. However, I think it does add a little bit of a dimension toward the bottom of the card. Now for the Eiffel Tower, I cut that out of crumb cake, and then I distressed it a little bit using a sponge dauber with Soft Suede ink. And then the tree branches were cut out of crushed curry. Then I added a little bit of soft suede to the bottom just to kind of darken out those tree trunks there. I did cut 3 branches and used some pieces in the background behind the Eiffel Tower and the bridge. You just want to lightly put a little bit of that color on top of those branches just to give it a little bit more dimension. Then I added some pumpkin pie ink, again using a dauber, just to bring in a little bit of an orange color to those leaves. I was fortunate enough to be able to visit France quite frequently while I was married. And he loved showing me his country. It is a beautiful country, and I must admit, they probably have the best food in the world. They do know how to cook. By the way, I'm not sure if I mentioned, but he also was a chef, classically trained in France. So I felt the Eiffel Tower needed a little bit more color to it, so I brought in some Early Espresso and darkened up a couple of places on it. I ordered those sponge daubers from our annual catalog, and in the case I believe I got off of Amazon, so I have a sponge dauber for each of my ink colors. Then I took some crushed curry and old olive with just a small little tree die using a scrap piece of paper. This will not be seen very much, but again, it will add some dimension to the final card. So I just inked up a few trees in both of those colors, and then I will be adding some of the crushed curry branches from the Silhouette Scenes die over them. So it just gives a little bit of a background, and this will be glued behind the bridge. Then I took another piece of Whisper white cardstock. We will eventually trim that to 1.5 by 7.5, and I used the 3D stone embossing folder and ran that through, then used some soft suede ink to distress it a little bit. Now this piece is 7.5 by 3 inches, But like I said, we will be trimming it down to 1.5 by 7.5. Then I used the Up and Away, and I apologize, but this stamp set is now retired, and I used that top die from the balloon to cut out the arches in the bridge. Now you could use an oval die, a small oval die. You could use a circle punch, or just use your paper snips to trim out those arches. You do have to be careful removing that tape, otherwise you might tear your paper. So you can see that will go across our scene to form our bridge. Now I took a piece of that cardstock that we had distressed, and I used the die from, which one? Beautiful Promenade, to cut out those little designs. I end up only using half of that top part there that I cut out. It was not even, so I redid it on the bottom side and then cut that to 1/2 inch, and it is 7.5 inches long. And you can see I ran that through my paper trimmer and trimmed it to 7.5 by 1/2 inch. Then used some soft suede to darken it up even a little bit more. And when you look at the final card, you will see where that goes on the bridge, looking very similar to the picture that I had copied. Now again, on the picture that I copied, on the bridge there is some ornate emblems on the bridge. So I took some Early Espresso and then that small stamp from the Parisian Beauty stamp set and stamped a little bit darker embellishment on that bridge. See, right there is where I'm pointing to those ornate little emblems. Now, do you see in the picture up at the top that darker brown area on that bridge? This is what this piece is that I'm gluing to the bridge to make it look like that. And you see how it is just a little bit darker than the stone. Now I'm just looking to see where this will fit. I want to make sure that my Eiffel Tower does not go up too high over the top of the card. So I'm applying just a little bit of glue on that lower, maybe about a third portion of the Eiffel Tower to lay it on top of that bridge. The bridge has not been glued yet to that bottom piece. I don't know what's going on, but my brain just will not engage today. I can hardly think of my words as I'm trying to spit them out. Oh. Now here's where I make a little mistake, where I think I need to cut out that bottom part of the Eiffel Tower. However, when I laid it on top of the water, I realized there is no water right underneath the Eiffel Tower. So I end up taking that piece that I cut out and glue it back underneath the Eiffel Tower because it just didn't look right when I laid it on top of that water there. You see how that looks like there's water under the Eiffel Tower? So now I'm going to work on the greenery behind the bridge. And I took some old olive cardstock and used the silhouette scene tree branch, cut that once. Then I also took one of the crushed curry branches and applied some of that to the background there of those stamped trees. Again, just to give a little bit more interest there and to fill that area up behind the bridge. I used liquid glue just to apply that there. And I will be trimming off the bottom, so it doesn't really matter that it does overhang a little bit. So you see, I just take my paper snips and trim that off. Then I start gluing down the shrubbery and trees to the back of the bridge. Just making sure a little bit peeks out from the back there. Again, just tucking a little bit of those crushed curry branches behind that bridge just to fill it out. You can tell this picture was taken in the fall because of the colors. Now this is where I realize that I actually need that middle part of the Eiffel Tower back there. So what I did was just take a piece of Scotch tape and taped it back in place on the back of the Eiffel Tower. And in the finished card, you can't even tell that that had been cut out. So then I took some foam adhesive strips that we sell. They're in the annual catalog. And I applied several to the back of that piece so that it would stand out and give a little bit more dimension to the card. Some of this I did cut out of the video because you don't need to watch me apply foam adhesive strips. They're double-sided and they're a little bit taller than our dimensionals and our mini dimensionals, so they're really good for shaker cards. I put a couple of little pieces there on the Eiffel Tower so that it would not lay flat and it would be elevated a little bit off of the card. You just need to be careful to make sure that none of that foam adhesive strip shows to the front of the card. So then I just remove the adhesive backing off of all of those foam strips and adhere it to the front of the card, making sure that the bottom of the bridge lines up with the water there. And I know it does overhang a little bit, but I just take my paper snips and trim that off. And even use a little bit of that leftover crushed curry branches and tuck them in behind the bridge. Dang, my brain's just not working today. That's okay, all I have to do is craft today. Then I take the two larger pieces of the tree and tuck them in, one on the left-hand side and one on the right-hand side, making sure that that cloud shows through. Just using a little bit of liquid glue to adhere those down. I'm really pleased with how this card turned out. I'm not quite sure who I'm going to give it to yet. I may send it to a good friend that I just was able to go on a trip with. She also likes adventure and to travel. Then I just take a little bit of liquid glue and apply a little bit to some of the areas that I had missed on those leaves. I like that fine tip glue bottle. I believed I ordered it off of Amazon. It may be a Doris brand, but it's really nice for those tiny little areas where you just need a thin layer of glue. I love how that little cloud just kind of sticks out there. It's been some years since I've been able to visit France. I'm due for a trip to go back there. I'm not quite sure when that would happen though. So then for my sentiment, I heat embossed it. As you can see, I start with basic black cardstock, but then I change it to Night of Navy. The black didn't look quite as good on the card, so I apply some Versamark ink to the stamp after treating it with my embossing buddy. Life is magnificent. It's an adventure. So apply your white embossing powder to your card. Tap off any extra. You can also use a small little brush to brush any off, and then heat set it with your heat gun, which is also in our annual catalog. And it's a good one. It's got two different settings, one for embossing and one for just drying things. So I like a high and a low. Then I took some real red cardstock, Night of Navy cardstock, and white cardstock. Use our classic label punch and punched out one of each color. Then trimmed it off just to give it a little bit of an impression that it was a flag. I will glue those to the inside of the card. I trimmed them off a little bit because they were a little bit too long for a flag. Just laying them together and then taking my paper snips and snipping it off. And like I said, I just use a little bit of liquid glue to glue them to that top left corner, laying them side by side, the blue first, then the white, and then the real red. Then I use my triple banner punch to trim that sentiment. It is 1 inch in width by about 2.5 to 3 inches. Then I take my 3-in-1 glue, apply it to the back of my scene, and adhere that on top of that Night of Navy front panel. And then just take my paper snips and trim off those branches there. Now, because this card is quite large, again, the finished card is 8 inches by 6 inches. I needed to make an envelope for that, and thank goodness I have our envelope punch board. We no longer sell this, but I do know there are other companies that do sell them. So sometimes when you need a larger envelope, this is a great tool to have. So I believe that is 11.5 by 11.5 piece of designer series paper. You can see I tore it a little bit with my scorer, but I'm able to fix it with a little bit of Scotch tape. So you just line it up at the 4 7/8 mark, score it on each side, then you line up toward the bottom there where you see the edge of that cutout area and score it back up to the top. And again, line up the edge there and score up to the top. There are other YouTube videos on how to use this envelope punch board. Then I'm going to round off the corners on all 4 sides. And then, like I said, I take a little piece of Scotch tape and tape that little torn area. I'm sure the recipient will not even notice it. So you fold and burnish each score line. Then you're going to take double-sided tape and apply it to both sides of your envelope. And I do wish I had paid a little bit better attention because my design is a little backwards. You will see in a moment. Again, it's not the end of the world. It's fine, but I wish it had been the other way around. So I always lay my finished card inside the envelope before removing the double-sided tape there, just to make sure it fits well. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate your watching my tutorials and subscribing, and I hope you have fun making this project. Goodbye.